Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm here with a very, very special guest and a very dear friend of mine. Seamus Osiris is in the house. How are you doing, Seamus?
I'm great. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Danny.
Good. I'm so excited to have you here. I know we've had so many pretty deep and meaningful and powerful conversations outside of, this podcast platform. And I'm just really, really so grateful for you taking the time to come and really have a slightly different conversation than we've had on this podcast. I know that you are such a potent, energetic, spiritual, really powerful guide. And I am really, really looking forward for you to, share that with my audience and to share this conversation is going to be less sciencey and probably, I'm willing to guess, a little more, deep and connected, as we're going to be talking about trauma and talking about these really big things. So I'm really grateful for you taking the space today to be here. And I'm excited to dive in and learn from you as well. I love this. I get to learn from all the guests that I bring on.
I hear that. We'll learn from each other for sure.
Yeah. Yes. Sounds good. Let's do it. So I love kind of starting off every episode for my audience, who might not know you yet, just sharing a little bit of your backstory, what's been your journey, with your health and your life. And I know it's hard to kind of summarize. There's so much that's happened for each of us, but, give a little bit of a backstory and sharing sort of what you're doing today to help clients.
Sure. Okay. My background is both in the allopathic medicine and the Eastern, you could say, spiritual medicine end. As a young kid, I realized I was different from other kids. I had these gifts. I could see spirits. You could say I could predict things coming. I would have helped my dad avoid a few speeding tickets if he had listened to his little boy in the passenger seat that said a cop was about to pull him over, and then it happened. There were many, many circumstances like that eventually I came to realize I had a gift, and my parents saw that too. And so they took me to different psychics and channelers. They were new to all this stuff, but they wanted to figure out their kid. And yeah, they confirmed that. And so over the years, I started to focus more and more on the understanding myself, understanding what made me different. And then fast forward to when I was 18, I was living on my own for the first time, and I started to go to a natural food store. I was just kind of intuitively drawn there. I'd been raised on Kraft Dinner, Campbell's soup, grilled cheese sandwiches, McDonald's, like all the baby boomer comfort foods, you could say, at home. And by the age of 18, I had all kinds of chronic health issues. I felt like my body was falling apart. I was watching my peers run circles around me, super athletic, and something was wrong. But I had this really strong intuitive gift, and I was drawn to this natural food store, and I hung out there a lot. And I realized, wow, there's other grains than wheat in the world. There's rice, there's quinoa. They had these big barrels of all these bulk foods and stuff. And there was a special woman there, and turned out she was somewhat of a spiritual master, you could say. And the natural food store was sort of like her little side gig. And she used it to find students. That was partly why she was there. And so she found me, and she took me under her wing and taught me a lot about natural food, traditional Japanese medicine, macrobiotics. I learned Aikido and Shiatsu and different things from her. And then she said, you're ready to now go on your path as a healer. You're meant to be a healer. That's why you're here. And so go and train, get a formal education, and you'll find yourself going other places. I did that, went to Vancouver, BC, got an education there in Shiatsu and other things. Then I was drawn to Salt Spring Island, BC, and I pursued all sorts of healing modalities. I met many very interesting teachers there. You could call them spiritual masters, definitely. Some were quite powerful. If any of your audience knows like the book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, or Autobiography of a Yogi, or books like that, where these young men or women meet these mysterious teachers out of nowhere. When you're ready, the teacher finds you, kind of thing. And they take them on and they show them that there are highly unusual humans in the world that are exceptional in their abilities. And so I was lucky enough to have that sort of life journey myself. I met many teachers that way. And I was a big advocate for the traditional apprenticeship model. And so, yeah, I won't list all the many things I trained in, but I'll list a few, like Chinese medicine, acupuncture, that sort of thing, various energy work modalities. And I will say to your audience, I just like to always say this to people: there is no difference between Reiki healing, pranic healing, quantum healing, theta healing. It's all the same energy. So it's good for people to realize that the universe is simpler than you might think. So I learned many of those things. And of course, holistic medicine, nutrition. I've fasted probably over 50 times in my life. Detox, cleansing. I've done it all. I've done all the experimenting on myself, tried it all. And then throughout my education, the great thing about the sort of westernized version of these Eastern arts is that they also teach very the more Western science end of things. So I learned pathophysiology and psychology, deep psychology, and anatomy, and all the various things that come with more of a Western science point of view. And then I have a lot of colleagues who are doctors. I have clients who are doctors who look to me as their doctor, which is, very humbling and beautiful. And yeah, and that's general. I mean, I'm doing my best to summarize it, but that's where I'm at today. And instead of, if anyone ever goes to my website, I don't list all the things I've learned. What I do now is I kind of integrate them into single services, and I just try to describe that it's an integration of things. Yeah. So it's like it's intuitive, and I just kind of pull the tools out of my tool belt that I need at the time when I'm working with people.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy, right? You definitely have so many tools in your tool belt that and have so powerfully been given some incredible gifts. And this is really fun for me because I didn't know a lot of your story as well, like getting to hear a little bit more of your backstory, and how I can imagine as a kid that must have been really really confusing or really tricky, right? Trying to figure that out, having gifts in a world that doesn't honor gifts, like, can be really jarring and really difficult. So, a huge props to you. And luckily your parents were at least somewhat understanding and supportive, which sounds, like really important, obviously. And now really honoring these gifts. It's really, I feel very grateful to have you in my life, and, as a tool, if I ever need it. I know Seamus is there. And I knew that, like, before even recording this podcast, we were chatting, like, what should we talk about? Because I know that you have so many, so many avenues we could go down, in conversation together. And we'll probably have you back on the podcast we've got a couple other ideas percolating for topics. But I knew that this topic around trauma, I think, is really, really important for my audience, and it's something we haven't yet talked about on the podcast. So I'm really looking forward to kind of shifting gears and diving deeper into that for everybody listening, because this has been a big part of my journey. And especially, and we'll get to this, I'm probably just kind of teasing a little bit now, but especially when we're talking about addictions and we're talking about our patterns with food, or patterns in relationships, or patterns, like, where do these patterns come from?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of thought out there, around the connection with trauma. So let's start at the top then. I know this is, a lot of people hearing the word trauma being thrown around, but in your words, what really is trauma, and how does it actually shape us?
I would describe trauma as very deeply unmet human needs.
Mhm.
So the needs for safety, security, support, encouragement, belonging, community, unconditional love, acceptance, and so on. And when we have moments in our lives where that really needs to happen in the moment and it doesn't, and sometimes the opposite happens, such as violence or deep emotional neglect, or somebody completely not seeing us in our pain, that is deeply traumatizing. And what I've found is the solution out of that is to meet the need.
Mm.
And there are various ways to do that, and we can get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that overall trauma is about human needs in a extreme situation being unmet when they badly need to be met.
Right. And
Yeah.
would you say most of that happens like in our younger years? Like, is that really, I mean, that's kind of what I've learned or seen, and even in my own work, in my own healing journey, right? Like, is there kind of a difference, obviously, of that happening, in those first years of life versus say now, right? When we're adults.
Yeah. I mean, in the psychology circles, yes, we've all learned it. Those formative years between like 0 and 7 or 8 years old, very, very impactful years. Definitely, they are certainly the foundation. But I would also like to bring to this world conversation about trauma that our teenage years are also very potent, and it's
Yeah.
often a period that a lot of therapists skip over or don't really pay as much attention to. So yeah, I would definitely say, and we can be traumatized throughout our whole life, but the traumas that happen in our formative years and our teens are extremely impactful on the rest of our life. And then coming from my lens of not only that traditional psychology, but also the Eastern perspective, they would say, and I would agree, that we inherit ancestral trauma from our family line. And then beyond this particular life in this particular body, we also inherit trauma from past lives, and
Mhm.
they come in too. Now, I don't expect your audience to all believe the things I'm saying, but like that's again just the lens I come from.
Yeah, and I love that. And as everybody knows, right? This is really about learning new concepts. So hopefully you all know this already when you come and listen to this podcast. Like, keep your mind open, because there's, I never would have understood that myself. Like, people talking about ancestral trauma, especially. And I very recently had an experience where I've been doing some ceremonies with various medicines, and I connected with an ancestral trauma. And that was the first time in my life. And like, it was my grandmother's mom, and it just all clicked, and I went through this experience, and now I'm 100% totally agree, and I know that that's because that's very real. It's very real when you start tapping into those areas. So just know, everybody listening that's like, what, that's so out there, just know that there might be a time where you just staying open to that and aware, you might notice some of these things popping up. We can think about how even outside of that, I think we can all agree that we have patterns handed down, right? Like when your grandma treats your mom a certain way, and then your mom treats you a certain way, like we can wrap our head around that sort of like hand me downs, right, through the family. So why also not energetic trauma? And it's, yeah,
Totally,
very, very real. So
totally.
yeah, I love that explanation, Seamus. I mean, this deep like absence of what we need,
Mhm.
right, not being there. And I love that you mentioned those teenage years, because I've been starting to go back and work through some of the things that happened, like with my groups of friends and getting kicked out of my group, and how like how absolutely traumatizing that was for me, and it prevented me from being vulnerable and open in future relationships because of that instance, right? So I'm really grateful that you mentioned that, right? Those years when we're not really sure who we are ultimately, right? Like we're still trying to make sense of the world. We don't know who we are, how we fit in. We
Yeah.
think that our, having people like us is still, the only survival technique, right? And it gets really tricky and complicated. So
Yes.
yeah, I'm grateful that
Yeah,
you
like
mentioned.
there seems to be like a psychological break period between about 8 and 12, 13, where generally things calm down and we're less impacted by life. But when our hormones start to do their uh, thing in 13, 14, 15, that's again another very vulnerable time in our lives where we're very impacted by things that happen to us, a very trauma prone period.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It makes
in our
sense. So
puberty. Yeah,
would you say everybody has trauma?
I haven't met a single person that doesn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I was
Everybody.
curious to ask you that. Like, is this because I want to point that out for everybody listening because I used to walk around thinking, I don't have trauma. I've never been, sexually abused or in a car accident or beaten by my parents. Like, I'm good, right? Um,
I'll
but at
say
some
this.
level,
I'll say this. If you, and I'm speaking to your audience and yourself,
yeah.
if you have a tendency to reach for your phone and scroll, if you have a tendency to, of course, eat sugar a lot, if you have a tendency to want to watch a movie after a hard day or just any time, if you need that glass of wine at night, if you need to have a cigarette, smoke a joint, shop, masturbate, whatever your thing is, your coping mechanism, it's a coping mechanism. And what are you coping with? You're coping with pain. You're coping with pain in the body. You won't need any of those things. In fact, you'll be quite satisfied to just sit there and look at the window at nature for a solid hour with a smile on your face if you don't have trauma. So if you're reaching for anything, and none of it matters what it is, it can be heroin or it can be shopping. It doesn't matter. They're coping mechanisms for pain, and that pain is trauma. Now, I also want to say, though, that we're in a sort of interesting time where trauma is so readily talked about that people are grabbing onto it as an escape in a way. Like, yeah, well, I'm traumatized. And it becomes their excuse. It becomes their justification. And that's the one thing I want to, guard people against, or get people to really ask, take a good look at themselves. Like, do I use my trauma as an excuse, as a victim story, etc.? Because it's good to be aware of these things, but like, if you're constantly saying, well, I was traumatized, or I have this trauma, then you're not making it any easier for it to go away. It's not good to necessarily claim it and say, this is me and this is who I am, because I'll tell you this, belief power. I'm a hypnotherapist as well, and one of the things you learn in hypnotherapy very, very quickly is that our beliefs run our lives. Yeah. And in the psychology realm, we know that the subconscious mind is incredibly powerful. Like, it governs 95% of our choices, right? And so because of that belief power, if we feed it too much with identifying with things, and here's a secret for you all, identity is the most powerful belief there is. There's no belief more powerful than what you identify with, what you think you are. Okay. There's like hopeful believing and like fantasy and all of that, but identity is solid. That's a belief that's unwavering, right? Like, I'm a man, I'm a musician, I'm a whatever it is. That has so much power. So when you say, I'm traumatized, this happened to me, I have this health condition, then you're really making your life a lot harder.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. We've actually, had that conversation in a slightly different way here on the podcast. I can't remember what episode it was, but we've talked about beliefs, we've talked about identity. And I always try to hit this home as well. I mean, a lot of my audience, identifies with being a sugar addict. And I'm like, well, if you make that your identity, you're never going to be anything else.
Mhm.
Right. So similar to what you're saying, right? When we like dig our claws into something and just assume it's who we are, we prevent any possibility of change. Right. That's just how it is. Right. And then we stay in that victim mentality, which obviously is never going to help us change. Right. And people might not want to hang out with us anymore because we're just whining all the time. Right. Like,
Totally.
yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. This is big, right? And in not using that. And I really appreciate you, because even for me, I'm thinking, where am I doing this? Because I mean, my ego is always there trying to, trick me into using this, right? Or different things, using excuses, using, this, well, I've been through this thing, which means I can't do X, Y, and Z, right? These stories.
Mhm.
And just being aware of those and paying attention and not judging them or shaming yourself for having that shadow side or having those thoughts, recognizing, hey, I am, using, well, I've been traumatized, so I can't work today, or whatever it is, right? Like
Mhm.
I've been using it in my relationship to get what I want, or just noticing that, I think sounds like a really key piece of this, right? And reminder, because I know, my audience are very prone to guilting the heck out of themselves, when they eat sugar, or when they notice these things that maybe aren't necessarily in alignment with their higher selves. So yeah, it's an important
Totally.
one. So
And
let's talk deeper about the addiction piece, because I know, like we've kind of just hit the surface of that. And I think this is really fascinating for everybody listening, and something that I'm a big fan of Gabor Mate, and he was the first one that kind of planted those seeds in my mind of really understanding the link between trauma and addictive behaviors and mental health. So what do you see happening there? What is that link? And how does actually these things and these absences and these deep rooted pains actually contribute to mental health issues and addictive patterning?
Mhm. Yeah, I love Gabor Mate too. Him and I have talked on the phone, and yeah, he's a lovely guy, and I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of what he says. In fact, when I discovered him, it really validated a lot of things that I'd sort of downloaded about reality, and he's absolutely right. But I think his message is incomplete. I will say that. So Gabor Mate's thing, and I definitely advocate for this too, is that when we're addicted to anything, so let's just use sugar for this conversation. Um, you could say that yes, it's a coping mechanism, like I said, and it's also a reach for connection.
Mm.
With sugar, we're trying to grab for an artificial connection of comfort, of something sweet, of something lovely, of something that like makes life feel sweet and joyous, you could say. And so Gabor would argue that that's from a deeply unmet need for connection and belonging with other humans. And so, myself, it was sugar and movies, even video games as a little boy. And because of my unique personality back, you could say, I reached for artificial connection because I was a bit of a loner. And so connection through the characters in movies, and the comfort and the sweetness of sugar. Both my parents worked a lot. They weren't around a lot, and my siblings were a lot older than me, so I was looking for connection for sure. Now, I do say his message is incomplete, and I think it's important to say this to everybody so they can like get these needs met. And that is that I've discovered personally that even if I have my partner over and we're cuddling a lot and we're having deep conversations and there's a lot of quality connection happening, I still want sugar. So connection is it's definitely diminished. It's definitely diminished. but it's deeper than that, and every individual's unique. And so connection is definitely a big part of the formula to resolving this. But I would just like to say there's more to it than that. So I'm not sure if I'm helping answer your question quite.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you just mentioned that last piece, because it's having me think, I've even recognized that too. Like, obviously with each substance, there might be some nuances. And I've thought a lot, obviously, about the sugar piece and how it's like, yes, this connection piece is so huge, right? In terms of like the pain and filling those needs. But even when you're in like the most connected areas, why are those still showing up? And I think there's also like this huge societal piece around, like, for me and Ben, we noticed that too. There's something about like enhancing the experience, or like bringing some sort of like fun and like excitement into like date night, or hey, let's go out for coffee. It's like, and a coffee and a scone, like that'll sometimes be something that will like almost like enhance our connection, or like falsely, right? But like enhance. So there's a lot of like social patterning and other things, outside of just that connection piece that, I'm and love, how we use sugar to show and feel love. And like, there's so many nuances to it, right? And it's not just, there's definitely not cookie cutter, like none of us are, but yeah, I noticed that too. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And thank you for adding to what Gabor shares, right? Around connection and these needs that weren't met. And I'll also share my personal experiences. I've been unfolding a few really deep things for myself, deep traumas that I didn't realize were traumas until I started really understanding this over the last sort of 2 years for myself. And for me, it was really an emotional disconnection from my family, right? From my parents. Like, I felt very alone and not seen in my essence and in my emotions, right? Like, my parents weren't very, emotionally available. The walls are there, the protectors are there, the ego's up. And that's, because of lifetime of, the way that all of our, parents in that generation have kind of had to like put on a brave face. So there was never that sort of level of like, when I'm talking about connection, for me, it was a very like emotional piece that was missing. It was like not really being able to access and feel. And then in that, I felt super unsafe. And I'm just unpacking all of this over the last couple of years, right? And then came in the separation anxiety and my intense need to control things to try to feel safe, and like all of these patterns that have really been something I've been unraveling and continue to unravel. But maybe for everybody listening, right, even just planting the seed to spend some time after this episode to journal and think about, where did this show up for me in childhood? Like, where were my needs maybe not met, when I'm thinking about being unconditionally loved and seen and heard and connected to. I think it's part of our human experience. Like, I think we all go through it at some point and have that there.
I would summarize everything you're describing as emotional neglect.
Yeah.
And that is a huge part of connection. So the connection that I'm talking about is intimate connection. And I don't mean a lot of us look at intimacy as sexuality. It's not what I'm talking about. I mean like real raw human presence with each other, where you cry with each other, where you lean on somebody's shoulder, where somebody reveals something to you. It's very vulnerable, like that kind of intimacy, that kind of connection. And, I've worked with so many people with all sorts of traumas, and you'd be surprised with what I'm about to say. I've found it is much easier to help somebody who's been physically violated and that form of trauma, than it is to help somebody who's been severely emotionally neglected.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you think that is?
Emotional. So the physical body and it going through trauma is one thing, but the mind and the psychology. Remember what I said about belief, right? Like, belief runs us. Like, belief is the fuel of everything in existence, really. And that's a whole other topic, but
next episode.
Yeah. But when our psychology is hit hard, that's really hard to change. That's really hard to change. It does I've seen lots of transformation. So there is tons of hope, because as quickly as we can be traumatized in a moment, we can be healed from the trauma in a moment. We can be instantaneously traumatized and we can be instantaneously healed. The same mechanism works. And maybe we can get into that. I can talk about what that formula is, how that happens. But yeah, emotional neglect is, I would argue, at the top of the worst kinds of traumas we can go through. So anybody who's listening that goes, well, I wasn't really traumatized when I was a kid. I had a pretty good life. I played in the forest. I had lots of friends, blah, blah, blah. And yet, like, I reach for sugar all the time. I can't stop looking at my phone, whatever it is. I would just say it's likely you suffered emotional neglect. Yeah. It's likely you didn't get intimate connection in your childhood. Yeah. Yeah. And regardless of like figuring it out, analyzing it, like what happened to me? What's the story? I would say focus a little less on that and a little more on, well, what do you need right now? Like what is missing? Like truly in the deepest part, because it's not a food. Yeah. And it's not an event and it's not a thing. Like it's an experience you need. That's a human need that's not met. And it's our responsibility as adults to go, yep, I was dealt these cards and that sucked. Mm-hmm. And maybe to a level I was therefore sort of a victim because I didn't have control of the cards I was dealt. But now that I see all that, now that I'm aware of these things, I need to take responsibility for doing something about it. So I think it's a both and. Like there's two sides of the story. Some say, yeah, shitty shit happened to you. You are a victim. And then others say, nope, you're 100% responsible for everything. Mm-hmm. And I would say, no, I think it's somewhere in the middle. There's a magic line there where you got to accept what's happened and go, yeah, I didn't have control of that, but I can actually do something about it. Yeah. So maybe some of your audiences in, is there I'm pretty sure like AA, there's something for sugar alcoholics, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of my audience is Overeaters Anonymous, or there's actually not a lot in terms of actual like sugar addiction recognition and support.
Right.
But food addiction is becoming more of a talked about and common thing. And there's different resources in different areas, but they come with their own limitations. Like, I don't necessarily agree with all of like what's going on there as well, but
totally.
Yeah, there's always the good, the supportive and unsupportive in anything. Right. And
totally. But there is the reason I brought that up is that there's one saying that pervades all the addiction therapy support groups. And that is simply this: God, source, creator, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's that line in the middle that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That is such a potent, tool to use and remember. Right. Yeah. I love that you mentioned that, because that's so true. Sometimes I find myself like way in the, like, we can take personal responsibility for everything. I'm like, wait a second. No, I mean, there definitely is, I think it's this conversation of like really owning how powerful we are, right? Like, yes, there's shit that's going to happen to us. And for me, a big supportive piece in that is like understanding, and this is just my belief system, right? But understanding like that was for a reason for my soul to go through and grow and learn something, right? Like these challenges that I was put here to go through and overcome. So what am I going to do about it? Like, how am I going to overcome? And I feel like that's, for me, that resonates with kind of why I'm here and why I'm doing what I'm doing and working with clients, how I work with them, right? Like this is part of my soul's path. And, that supports me to kind of see it that way. But yeah, exactly like you said, right? Like there's not just one way. And I love that. Yeah, there is that line in the middle, right? I mean, we've got to get out of the black and white thinking and see that gray middle area with these areas.
Totally.
These things.
And we need to realize that healing trauma is a holistic thing, that it's psychological, it's emotional, it's mental, it's physical, it's spiritual, it's all the things. And so, yeah, I'm sure you're teaching people like, here are some alternatives. You can have apples, you can cut up carrots with hummus, you can do all these like diet techniques, right? And those are all important. Getting down to the biological solutions for sure. But if you're not addressing the underlying traumas that ultimately are leading for the craving, the reaching, then it's hopeless.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a very real like epiphany that I had a few years ago, and why now, as all of you listening to this podcast, or anybody who's worked with me, you know, like this is so much deeper of a conversation, right? This is like relearning how to feel, relearning how to like love yourself and connect and rewire those neural pathways and those belief systems and identity piece. And like a lot of this stuff, this is really, you know, become my focus because of that. You know, I love this. I often use this, like, I don't know if you've heard of the Dilts pyramid of change. No. I often use that. It's some fancy mancy, you know, therapist or psychologist back in the day created that. But like most people, like at the bottom of the pyramid is like environment and behavior. That's where most people try to like make change. And they're like stuck in that loop for the rest of their life, like trying to build a new habit or trying to like move houses and expect everything to change. Right. But at the top of that pyramid is like, you know, our beliefs and our mindset, our identity, our spirituality, our connection to source. Like that is where real change or real healing happens, which is where the trauma is, right? Like that is diving into the depths is how we actually, you know, create that lasting, you know, healthy relationship with ourselves and therefore everything else around us, right? Which some of us maybe never will get there. And it might be, I don't know, there's never really an end. I don't believe there's an end. You know, I'm always going to be learning and evolving, but yeah, it's really fascinating. We start to kind of open our minds to the power that we do have and all these pieces, right? So let's shift gears a little bit here, because this is such a amazing conversation. By the way, I'm just loving having this conversation with you, and hopefully everybody listening, you know, you're starting to resonate with some things, and maybe now you're starting to identify with, wow, I probably do have trauma. There is probably something there. So where do we start, Seamus? You know, I like, what it would be the next step if somebody's listening right now being like, oh my goodness, I think I have some things here. Like, this is really resonating with me. You know, my mom was never around, or my parents worked all the time, or, you know, I can't put my phone down, or sugar, right? So where would be a gentle place to really get started and maybe exploring trauma and exploring even healing through?
Okay. Lots of suggestions for that.
Great. Bring them all on. Everybody listening, get your notepad out, write them down.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll do my best in the time we have to bring you my top solutions. I'd say the first and maybe most important thing that I want to mention, and this coincides with a post I recently put out on my Facebook page, is that like I said, when you're reaching for something, when you have a craving, there's a pain there, and that you're trying to sidestep the pain ultimately. And so if reaching for the craving is not necessarily addressing the pain, because you're reaching for the craving 2 hours later or the next day or whatever, then clearly the pain needs to be addressed. So how do we address pain? Well, simple. We feel it. Yeah. We feel it in all its fullness, in all its terrible anguish, in all of its deep discomfort. We have to feel it. So there's a technique or a process that some call emotional alchemy. I sometimes call it emotional transmutation or trauma transmutation. And I could dive into like the energetic structure of the body and how the chakras actually digest trauma if you give them a chance. But ultimately what it comes down to is piece by piece, little by little, clocking time in the practice of, let's call it emotional transmutation. You, instead of reaching for the thing you're craving, you take 5 minutes to sit back or lay down and close your eyes and feel the deep desire for the thing you're craving. Like really let it come over you, and that like the urgency that's there. And then ask out loud or in your mind, what's behind this? What's behind this urgent desire? For me, the desire can be so strong for the things that I've been addicted to in my life, mostly sugar and screens, that I feel like almost like I'm going to die, or that something bad's going to happen if I don't have it. And so to sit with that feeling is really uncomfortable. Yeah. It's extremely hard. And so it's no wonder that most of us don't want to do it. We want to reach for the thing instead. So, and especially if you're lonely, I find, especially if you're somebody who doesn't have a partner and you're longing for them, or you just don't have friends that you can really connect with on a really deep level, it can be so devastating to let yourself feel that anguish. But you must. That's the only way. The only way out of suffering is through suffering. And the ultimate solution to suffering, to end it all, is acceptance. Acceptance is the way out of all suffering. Mm-hmm. And so how that looks in this practice I'm describing is, instead of going like, oh, I don't want to feel this, or oh, I want to get rid of this, I don't want this trauma to be here anymore, I want it to go away, I want to delete it, I want to heal it now, etc. You have to go, no, I welcome this. Actually, I welcome this feeling. I welcome this pain. In fact, if I were sitting at a dinner table right now, I would say, anger, confusion, anguish, desperation, come sit beside me. Come sit beside me at the table. I welcome you. I welcome you. I'm not going to try to change you. I'm not going to try to get rid of you. And that's the unconditional love that ultimately we all need to use to transmute this stuff. Now, there's one sort of caveat to this, and that's that our ego loves to get all wrapped up in drama and loves to feed on the pity party, let's say. So that's one thing you got to be cautious of with this practice. And one way to avoid that is, if you're more of a spiritual, open-minded person and you believe in the energetics of your body, I'll advise you in this way. Use your mind to visualize your feet as if a gateway is opening in your feet, and visualize with your mind a gateway opening in the top of your head, just a little bit, just a little tiny doorway opening, and look at those sort of gateways you've opened as sort of exits for the trauma to leave your body, for the earth to take it on, and for the cosmos to take it back to source, right? You could also just kind of imagine sort of a flushing down feeling. You don't have to be spiritual and energy focused to get this, but I would say, like, imagine like a washing going over you while you feel this. And that way, not only do you let the emotions and feelings and pain flow, but you also let it go. Mm. You give new space for the new energy. And when you clear up that space, if you're lonely, people show up, right? And that's the beauty of it. Yeah. This can be, like I said, like we all watch like movies with heroes and slaying dragons and big victories and stuff. And I'd say, like, who among us actually sees that kind of stuff in real life? Like, what is real life dragon slaying? I would say what I'm describing is that real life dragon slaying, real life true warriors do exactly what I'm describing. Yeah. You don't avoid their pain. They go into their pain. Yeah. And then maybe 10 minutes of it is all they can handle. And then they go and reach for that cookie or that alcohol or whatever. That's fine. I'm not saying like cold turkey, not at all. I'm saying clock time. Mm-hmm. Make it a practice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Seamus. Like it's so much of that resonates with like what I've learned and what I've been attempting to practice, right? And all the conversations that I've been having, around that emotional piece, that like I call it making friends with your feelings, right? Like we've got to know that they're there for a reason and actually be grateful for them. Like they're here to teach us and to be part of our human experience. The resistance to the pain, right? To the anxiety and the stress and the like whatever these heavy emotions are, that resistance is actually what's causing the problem, right? If we actually totally accept everybody, right? That I love that you said that with unconditional love, right? Like that next level of unconditional love, they're all there, right? And I know a lot of my audience and myself included, there seems to be like this belief of like, if I really feel the pain, I'm not going to make it, right? Like I'm not going to come out the other side. I know I used to think that if I really let myself feel this, I'm going to be on the floor in my bathroom for the rest of eternity. And that's not true, right? That's so not true. And the more you clock time, I love that you said that, right? The more you prove to your body somatically that like, hey, I'm okay. I can totally break down and crumble and then come back a half an hour later,
Yeah.
right? And still function as a human being and still live life and everything's okay. My kids are still alive, right? Working through that is difficult, and
Totally.
and it does take that warrior mindset and brave. Like it is, I've just did that a couple of weeks ago, really went into some deep healing I need to do with my dad and some wounds I have there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And just like you said, I allowed myself some space, like it was an hour or two. And then I was like, nope, Netflix time. Like I was like, okay, I did it. I'm good. Now I'm going to watch a movie and like just go for a walk, watched a movie, like took a break. Being gentle with ourselves in that I think is really loving as well.
Yeah. And you got to be gentle with yourself. And that gentleness does sometimes look like doing things piecemeal, like doing a little bit. I did 10 minutes of this emotional transmutation that really sucked. And now I really need that movie. And that's okay. That's okay. As long as you're like noticing little bits of progress going along, like if you can look at your back at the last 3 months and go, yeah, I was there and now I'm here. Yeah, that's an improvement. I definitely went up, right? And that's the value of journaling. And that I would also say that that's another tool for this kind of stuff is journaling. Again, it's about going back to the previous conversation. Connection is a big part of it. And the ultimate source of connection is yourself. And they say God is within. Every tradition says that, and it's for good reason, because if you do not have an intimate connection with yourself and your inner world, then you can't have intimate connections with other people, really, like not truly satisfying deep ones. So growing an intimate relationship with yourself in whatever way possible, such as journaling, such as having a bath, but not just having a bath laying there in the warmth, having a bath and maybe like massaging your legs while you're there, maybe like feeling yourself. Like I've never really like noticed the nuances of my deltoid muscles before. Like, isn't that cool? And oh, look, there's like new gray hairs growing on my chest. That's me. Or, like getting to know yourself, getting intimate with yourself. That's really important. I would also say, because traumas are a lot about beliefs, and interrupt me if we're running out of time or anything, Danny, but hypnotherapy, maybe I have a bit of a bias because it's what I practice, but any type of therapy like hypnotherapy that goes directly to the subconscious mind, where it's actually designed to do that, is incredibly powerful and can really move mountains. And like NLP is another example. EMDR actually works with the subconscious mind as well. And I created a system called body-mind repatterning, and it's a fusion, you could say, of EMDR and NLP and hypnotherapy and other things like all come together. But they're extremely powerful. And then other people have noticed that, ceremonial experiences are also very powerful. I personally don't necessarily advocate for them, like strong plant medicine ceremonies and stuff. I've done them myself, but if you think of yourself as sort of a sensitive being, if maybe you identify with sort of new age concepts of like indigo children or things like that, I would really advise you to be very cautious about plant medicine ceremonies. Yeah, they can really help people. In fact, like full-blown heroin addicts go away in a ceremony and they're healed instantly from it. But there are other gentler ways to work through this stuff. Breath work is an example where you don't have to take in a substance. You simply use the natural built-in technology of your body through the power of the lungs, which in Chinese medicine are what disperse the qi, as the Chinese would say. They disperse the energy in your body. So you could look at that as they break away and push out and disperse the trauma. So any good breath work workshop, weekend retreat thing, people are bawling their eyes out, and that's for good reason, because the lungs are very powerful for moving trauma through the body. Yeah, before I carry on, is there anything you want to say?
This is so amazing, Seamus. I'm like, which of these have I tried? And I've done most of these, or, as part of my healing journey, but there's still so much to explore. And I'm really curious about EMDR. I have a couple friends who have been using it in our circles, right, that have like had some good results, and would love to hear more about like what you're doing with hypnotherapy as well. I agree to that. Anything where we can get back into those patterns, right, and get back somatically, even in the body, right, to relive in a safe space. And I would be curious, like one thing that's really coming up for me, I'm curious your thoughts on that, like, going through and say, okay, yes, I'm going to work through and heal some of my trauma. There's a big caution there as well with not doing that alone. And my medicine guide had made it really, like, said this really interesting and makes so much sense, that all of these traumas have happened like because of disconnection. We can't repattern them without connection, right? Like redoing that together in a vulnerable space with someone, whether it's, a hypnotist or a shaman or a therapist or whoever it is, right, that's there to like guide you through that. I think like that's the repatterning of, I'm not alone in my pain, and I'm here to be supported in that. Like, do you agree? Like, what do you see on that? Right. Because I know a lot of people, like I've heard horror stories, right, of people going and trying to say, feel their deepest pain of some big traumas that have happened, or going back into that on their own. And it actually just being re-traumatizing because you don't know how to like support yourself through it or kind of work through those things. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. You bring up a fantastic point, Danny, for sure. And like going back to what I was saying earlier, like in terms of it being extremely difficult for people who have a lot of extreme loneliness, who don't have a partner, who don't have deep friendships. Yes, this can be work that maybe provides or needs some caution, you could say, when you have absolutely no one. And so I would say the number one priority in that situation is you need to get involved in groups. You need to get involved in groups that are designed to be intimate, that are designed to ask of the members to get vulnerable and to share of themselves. If there are men listening, I would say join men's circles. Men's circles are very powerful, and I'm focusing on men for a moment here because there's a lot less permission in society for men to feel and get vulnerable, especially with other men. We tend to burden our girlfriends with our problems and our emotions, and we need to actually like give them a break and lean on men. And I lead men's circles. I have a men's organization through which I do this kind of work. And why I do that is because it has changed so much for me. So regardless of your sex, gender, identification, like just focusing on a group where there's connection. Maybe you've got friends already, they're acquaintances, you don't know them well. Consider hosting something. Consider and design it in a way where people share intimate things and get to know each other. But yeah, connection is really, really important. And then if you really want to go leaps and bounds, like really grow, then you want to seek a mentor for sure. Like in AA and other addictions groups, there's always sponsors, right? And so sponsors are people that have been there, done that. And yeah, ideally your mentor, your shaman, your healer, your therapist, they've been through their share of suffering. I certainly have. And you need that. Like, if you really want to get to the next stage, you got to have somebody that is sort of like your medicine person. Let's say, going back to tribal cultures, there was always a medicine woman or a medicine man that was sort of like the advisor of the chief and the healer that everybody would go to. And if you don't have somebody in your life like that, definitely seek them out. And I'm more than happy to help myself. And I would also just add that consistency is really important. Like, yeah, okay, great, you found a group, but are you going? Like, are you going every week? Or you found a friend and you have a deep connection with them, great. Like, are you actually going out of your way to make sure that you're connecting with them? Maybe you need to actually like set up an accountability structure with a friend. I've got a friend that I talk to every day. He's a man, and he's a beautiful guy. He's very sensitive like myself, and we talk almost every day. And we typically start our mornings with it, and we go really deep, and it really helps my day get going myself. So, and then I've got my partners and whatnot, but I've wizened to the fact that it's not good to lean on just your partner.
Right.
If you have just your partner as your intimate connection and depth, that will hurt the relationship eventually. It really will. So you need to sort of spread your wings. If you're a woman, join a women's circle, men join a men's circle, or go to an addictions group. Go to meetups.com and find a group that works. But just make sure that there's that intimate flavor to it. That's the key, because you got to get that real human, raw connection, or it's not going to work.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said all of those things. That's so true. I've noticed that in my journey over the years. It's like, I can see it so clearly now, like the superficial relationships that I used to have versus now being in that like real deep, like soul connection and the healing that actually happens there. And as you already know, right, like that consistency is something that I've built into my life in a very important way. And it's been a huge piece of helping me heal and see things and just work through some of my shit. And like that consistency, if I didn't have that like blocked in my calendar every 2 weeks, like and every month and every like whatever that looks like, it just wouldn't happen, right? 6 months would go by and you'd be like, oh yeah, I should call that person and forgot to connect, right? Like time just flies by. So yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, you know, that piece and kind of reaching out and being really aware of like, is this actual people here showing up, like taking responsibility for their life, wanting to grow, being open to these deep conversations, or are these just, you know, people who aren't quite ready for that, right? And being able to decipher the two. The last thing that I want to say, and then we'll wrap things up. I just wanted to touch back on what you said about like, as you were speaking to men. And I think that's really important. All the women listening, right, who have men in their lives, I do feel that we can do so much to support our men in finding that, right? In knowing that it's okay to be emotional. Like I've taken that on as like, you know, I feel like that is one of my roles. It's not my responsibility, but it is one of my roles that I can be here to show like, and help my husband repattern, right? Like if he's crying, telling him this is great, let it keep coming, right? What do you need? Right? I can hold space for him. And, you know, cause I know men just don't get that opportunity. And then totally ditto to what you said, right? It's so toxic in a relationship where we're relying fully on the other person. And we noticed that in our relationship. And thanks to you actually being a huge catalyst, Ben is now in a men's group, and it's been incredible seeing him. And he's actually in a different training this week with a different group of people, and just finding his own ground in like getting that deep support. And then we can support each other as well. But having that, I think it's so much easier for women to kind of create that, right? And create that emotional space and that emotional place. So any women out there listening, I think there are ways that we can support the men in our lives, just letting them know that it's really important and it's welcome and it's a sign of strength, and it's sexy as hell to see them be emotional and raw and real, and it's just going to absolutely improve your relationship and ability to connect as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that piece about the men. I think that's really, really important. Any women listening,
it's critical. Yeah, there's a real epidemic of mental health issues with men. The suicide statistics are completely different from men to women, and that's for good reason. And so men listening, seek out a men's circle, get in touch with me, like get connection with other men. And then when you come back to your women, you're strong, and they can feel your masculine energy, and then from there they feel that attraction, and the polarity of your connection is powerful. And like I'm sorry for those that are lesbian or homosexual or in the LGBTQ community. I come from a heterosexual point of view, so I just want to say that that's the only experience I have. So that's the lens I'm coming from when I'm speaking this way. But so when I say that, guys, let your feminine out with other men, like really, really open up. And trust me, men's circles are designed to do that. Good ones are really good for that. We're talking guys bawling their eyes out like babies in front of each other. And to have another man witness you doing that, or even raging so loudly that if any women were around, they'd be terrified. But men need to get their rage out. There's so much anger men hold inside. And a good men's circle, some are like hosted in warehouses and things like that, so that guys can really let it rip. And the catharsis and the healing and everything that comes afterward from that, of beautiful men, like really there holding each other like unconditionally in their presence, and just being like, wow, that was amazing. I love you for having inspired all of us to feel as deeply as you just did. And it's incredibly powerful. I can't speak enough for deep brotherhood bonds and the power that has, and the power that brings to a relationship when a man frees himself from his pain and can show up in his masculinity with his woman, instead of consistent sort of feminine, like, oh, I'm sad, oh, I'm all these things, and she's constantly holding space for him and wondering like, where did my man go? You know what I mean? So
it's tricky.
Really important stuff.
Yeah. And I have to add to that, because us women have a lot of pent up yelling that we need to do as well too. Like there is a lot of anger and beliefs that it's not okay for women to feel anger or express anger. So there's like, for both of us, whatever you identify as, we have some things to release, and doing that in community, working through these traumas in community, and finding that safe space for you to do that is key. And I love that as kind of our final message. Seamus, is there anything, as we wrap up, like, is there any last thing that you want to make sure everybody takes away from today, or something that we didn't get to cover?
Good question. Well, the therapies I mentioned, like hypnotherapy and ceremonies and things, they are the leaps and bounds in your evolution. They can really like take you to a whole new level in very short order. But you have to be ready. And in order to get ready, and in order to generally make the change happen in your life, you got to do your homework, or as they say, you got to do the work. I'm sort of over the work being said so often, but you have to take the responsibility and apply yourself to your own growing of the intimate connection with yourself, feeling your pain, and so on. And so I would say, that aspect of things, like the emotional transmutation practice I was describing, getting yourself outside first thing in the morning for a morning walk or a jog, taking just 5 minutes to meditate. If it's hard to meditate, just do 5 minutes. Just do 5 minutes of yoga. Like, things like that. You don't have to do these stereotypical things like yoga and meditation, but that they're just ways to get intimate with yourself and like with the deeper aspects of reality, like what's going on here, who am I, what is God? Like all these things are critical to letting go of your trauma, and therefore letting go of your addictions, and therefore being free from this constant like craving cycle to being an empowered sovereign being that chooses what they want when they want.
Yes. Yeah, that's amazing. What a powerful final message, Seamus. Thank you so much. I mean it. This has been such an incredible conversation, and I'm so grateful for you sharing this and opening this conversation, even for me to share my pieces here on the podcast. And hopefully everybody listening, you really got a lot out of this. And I hope that, some of that resonated, and that you will take that reminder. I know I hit this home a lot as well, Seamus. It's like, listening to this podcast is great, but what are you going to do about it? So like, take whatever that first step is for you. That's your action item, your homework here. Maybe sit with your journal, maybe, go get your feet in the earth, maybe seek out, start looking for communities or groups, right? Like whatever that next step is, nothing's going to change unless you do something. So
Get an
I hope.
accountability buddy.
Yes.
Accountability buddy. Make these commitments to yourself, commit it to your accountability friend, talk daily if you can, and hold each other to account in a loving way.
I love it.
I'll say that's very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. So beautiful. Okay. We're definitely going to have you back. There's so many things that I want to talk to you about. But for now, for anybody who resonated with you, where can they come and find you online and reach out?
They can simply go to my website, SeamusOsiris.com. My name's spelled differently than what it sounds. It's Seamus, and then Osiris, like the Egyptian god, and then .com. And that's my website. You can find all my services and online courses and things there.
Awesome. I'll make sure that's linked below in the show notes. So anybody, you can just click the link below and easily jump over and reach out and connect with Seamus. I highly recommend, if anything that he shared resonated today, please reach out. He is very open, if you can't already tell, very open and loving and welcoming your messages. So thanks again, Seamus, for being here. This was absolutely incredible.
Thank you, Danny. This has been awesome. Yeah.
Good. Well, we can't wait to have you back and have some more deep chats. I'm loving this. And everyone tuning in, thank you for listening to another episode. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what your next step is. So don't hesitate to reach out to me as well and let me know what your takeaway was from today's episode. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.